On the agenda for today, we have the CCDF fraud recovery regulations, the recovery strategies and considerations, collection strategies and considerations. And after each of those two sections, we are going to have time to do breakout sessions. We're hoping to have this be an interactive webinar and not just us talking at you. So there'll be an opportunity to break out into rooms and have a discussion amongst different states on either the recovery strategies or the collection strategies that either work or don't work for you in your states. So we're hoping for good participation in those breakout rooms. Then we'll have an opportunity to just look at some real estate examples, and if we have time, have a large group discussion about different things that might be happening in your state. We'll follow that up with some resources, and then we'll wrap it up and do our ending. So that's what the agenda looks like today. We have about an hour and a half. So with introductions, our presenters today will be from the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability, Janae Williams, who is our Program Integrity Lead, and Mike McKenzie, who is a Program Integrity Subject Matter Expert, will be presenting the majority of the material. You will also likely meet some folks in the breakout rooms today. One other person from our team is Tamara Schmidt, who is also a Program Integrity Subject Matter Expert, and Michelle Boyer will also be attending in one of the breakout rooms. As I said, we are doing this in collaboration with the Office of Child Care. A couple of folks that you will see in the breakout rooms from the Office of Child Care are A.D. Fatur and Linda Winings. And here to welcome you today from the Office of Child Care is Toya Bryant, who is the Director of the Division of Oversight and Accountability. Toya? Might be on mute.
Let's try it again. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Thanks, Toya.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. I have to apologize. I got on in time to test my audio and to make sure my camera was working, but now technology has taken over and my video is not working, but I hope that everyone can hear me. So good afternoon, and I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Office of Child Care to the first webinar of our 2024 National Program Integrity Webinar Series. These webinars are part of OCC's ongoing work to support states, territories, and tribes to strengthen their program integrity and accountability efforts in their CCDF programs and to minimize the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse. As stewards of public funds, lead agencies have a responsibility to ensure CCDF accountability, safeguard funds, maximize benefits of eligible children and families, and spend tax dollars appropriately. In today's webinar, you will have a chance to hear about fraud recovery as previously shared and collection strategies, and have discussions with other states to learn more about their challenges and successes. As always, we value your ongoing participation and use your feedback to help us select topics for these webinars and other TA materials. Please continue to share your ideas about what you would like to see in the future to inform upcoming webinars. Thank you all again for joining us today and for all of the work that you do to support children, families, and early care educators. Now I will turn it over to Bob to get us started.
Thank you, Toya. And before I go on to our webinar logistics, I did forget one of the Office of Child Care folks, Penny Job, will also be in one of the rooms. So if you do see her in your room, please say hi. Okay, so we are on the Zoom platform, and as you all know, if you've been on Zoom for a while, there can be some difficulties. So sometimes it might require you to log off and log back on again. Just remember that we are going to have breakout rooms that can sometimes also lead to some problems. So just remember to make sure you're on mute if you're not talking, and unmute yourself when you're ready to talk. If you have any questions, raise your hand. You can find that in the bottom toolbar. Somewhere in there is going to be, depending on whether you're using the app or your browser, a place to raise your hand, or you can put it in chat, and we're going to do our best to monitor chat today for any questions that might come up. We are also going to have a couple of different checkpoints to check knowledge. So a quiz will kind of pop up in front of you. You'll be able to answer those questions, and we can take polls that way If you're not able to do that, that's okay. We'll have the questions also on the screen, so you can kind of take a look and see if you can, you're correct as far as your knowledge test goes. That's it. So with that, I think we will get started. Remember, there is evaluations at the end, so make sure that you fill that out. As Toya said, that does help guide us in our TA development. So with that, I will turn it over to Janae to start the webinar.
All right, thanks, Bob. Okay, so as part of today's discussions, we wanted to share with you, with our new and some of our seasonal attendees of our webinars, the CCDF federal regulations regarding the recovery of misspent funds that are a result of fraud. So at 45 CFR 98.68B2, agencies are required to describe in their plan processes in place to recover fraudulent payments. And we'd like to also point out here that fraud is not defined in the CCDBG Act or final rule, and states have flexibility in defining fraud. Next, at 45 CFR 98.60I, we find that agencies must recover payments from the party responsible for committing fraud. Now, as we go through the rest of this webinar and discussions, you'll find that agencies recover improperly paid funds in many different ways. But for now, let's just discuss a benefit to recovering these funds. So one benefit is that agencies can repurpose these recovered funds for activities such as increasing CCDF funds availability for eligible families, increasing provider payment rates, and expanding quality initiatives. Now, when deciding how to repurpose these funds, remember, these recovered funds must be used for allowable CCDF purposes consistent with the lead agency's approved CCDF plan. Other activities include implementing or increasing program integrity activities, such as program integrity trainings, manuals, webinars, and etc., implementing additional fraud prevention and detection strategies, or conducting risk assessments to review internal control activities. Also, we'd like to take the time here to point out another federal regulation at 45 CFR 98.60G, which provides timelines for repurposing those returned funds. So feel free to review these regulations at your convenience and contact your regional office for guidance or TA in these areas or in this area. And lastly here, with the recovery of these funds, at best, agencies build public trust, they exhibit accountability, and have the ability to serve more eligible families. So now we will do a quick knowledge checkpoint. So on your screen, there are a list of questions based on the information shared. Please take a moment to answer these questions on the poll that will appear on your screen here shortly. And if you're unable to see all three questions, then you can scroll down for questions 2 and 3. If you're unable to see the poll at all, feel free to just type your answer in the chat. And we will give you guys a few moments to respond. And I won't go over the questions. We'll check the chat and see if looks like everyone has access to the poll. So we're doing good there. We have about 36 participation right now. All right, looks like we're at 55 and okay. Give it a few more minutes here. Well, 1 more minute. Provide everyone an opportunity to answer. And these questions are based on the information I just reviewed with the regulations. All right. So it looks like we're stopping at about 70%, 71%. I'll close it in about 10 seconds here, folks. All right, so let's share the results. All right, so are lead agencies required to recover fraudulent payments? The answer is true. The lead agencies do not have discretion over who they can collect fraudulent payments for. That answer is also true. They're required to collect those payments from the individual that committed the fraud. And I do see that we do have some I don't know, so definitely reach out to the regional office for additional technical assistance or guidance in these areas of recovering funds. So I will stop sharing these results. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Mike McKenzie. To discuss recovery strategies and considerations.
Okay, thank you so much, Janae. We're going to spend the next 15 minutes or so discussing recovery strategies to consider when you establish a claim for improper payments in CCDF. Next slide, please, Janae. Once fraud has been established, it's important to communicate to the debtor, either providers or the participants, their rights and responsibilities up front. There's a few questions to ask and document in those upfront communications related to repayment options, the appeal process, and what happens if non-payments result in collections or referral to collections. So next one, there we go. I think I might be able to do this, Janae. So does the client or provider, the debtor, know what repayment options are available? We encourage you to record or document calls explaining in detail the amount owed and available repayment options. Also, we suggest that you have the provider or client, the debtor, sign a document that includes a breakdown of the repayment options available and the option that was selected by the debtor. Is there an appeal process? I hope so. We want to ensure that your clients and providers understand their right to an appeal. And again, we recommend a signed acknowledgement form requesting or forfeiting the right to an appeal. And then we want to make sure that the debtor understands what happens if payments are not made as agreed to. So include information regarding collection steps for failure to comply with the repayment terms, and provide any information available on avoiding the step of collections. There's a few different ways that providers or participants can repay any improper payments. Probably the most popular is repayment agreements or monthly installments. You can agree with that and set it up and then deduct future payments from that. Lump sum payments are a one-time large payment as opposed to monthly installment payments that are usually smaller. And then, of course, what you can do also is combine those two. So maybe your debtor is able to pay a certain amount of lump sum up front and then wrap up the rest of the overpayment with some type of a repayment agreement. Finally, We're going to talk in a couple more slides down the road here about restitution, which is related to court orders. If you have an active provider or participant receiving CCDF funding, you can look at recouping future provider payments to offset the improper payment, or a reduction in future participant payments. Repayment agreements are popular among CCDF agencies, and here are a few things to consider when developing repayment agreements and their terms. Frequency. So think about it in terms of when does the debtor get paid? You can verify that through pay schedules and set the payment frequency accordingly. So again, agencies have a lot of flexibility. You can set this up monthly, bi-weekly, weekly, whatever works out for your agency. In terms of the amount, again, we suggest that you verify the debtor's monthly income and base the payment based on that verified income. Consider other living expenses. We certainly want to get our CCDF money back if it was improperly received, but we don't want to do it to the extent of bankrupting the debtor. So for instance, here we have an example of 40% or more of the debtor's income is probably too high to set an amount for payment going forward. Finally, time frame. How long does the debtor have to repay the funds? We encourage you to set reasonable thresholds to guide the length of those agreements. In repayment agreements that we have seen, they vary anywhere from 12 months to 60 months. And again, keep in mind how much the debt is and set the repayment agreement accordingly. All right, we've got another checkpoint here to test your knowledge. 3 more questions, and Janae, if you'll pull up the poll for us, we'll have people look at that. And again, scroll down if you can only see the first question, and answer accordingly. Let's see, in question 2, you can choose more than one answer because we know that many agencies have more than one repayment option. And so we're going to give you just a minute or two to answer these 3 questions also. Check your knowledge. Looks like people are answering fast and furiously. We're over 40 now. We'll give you just about 1 more minute, and then we'll let you know what we have in terms of responses. Looks like the responses are slowing down, so I'll let you close the poll whenever you want, Janae. All right, so we had 55 people respond to this. Regarding the first question, does your agency recover misspent funds that were a result of fraud? The majority said yes. That is the correct answer. If you answered no, I would encourage you to reach out to your regional office and ask for some technical assistance. Question number 2, what recovery strategies does your agency use? Check all that apply. And so repayment agreements clearly is the forerunner, followed by one-time full payments, which surprises me a little bit. And provider recoupments is also a big one. And then finally, the last question was, which recovery strategy is more successful in your agency? And again, repayment agreements seem to take the vote, but provider recoupments was a healthy second place. So thanks so much for participating in this poll, guys. Appreciate it. Let's move on to the next slide for the presentation. And again, the bottom line is whatever payment option you choose, it should be convenient and should be geared towards repayment success. So the main thing is to get that money back if you can. Establish your claim, and then see what you can do about getting that money back from the debtor. Funds can be recovered using various repayment methods, and account management systems can prove to be beneficial for the lead agency and for the debtor. In the case of the debtor, with online account management systems, they can make payments and view the payment history very easily. So that's a real plus for your debtors, and actually can encourage them to make payments. Lead agencies also benefit from this because they can run various accounting reports to remain consistent in their collection process, and also report on the success of their collection activities to administration. Having various payment methods available, especially automated, allows the agency to be able to collect more funds. Those could include money orders, debit cards over the phone or online, or cashier checks. Other considerations, these are methods that have gained acceptance over the last few years. The idea of a kiosk for cash payments or a credit card. Again, you can have that accepted online or over the phone, or automated clearinghouse checks or e-checks. Again, the bottom line here is to make it easy for your debtor to repay this debt. As we discussed earlier, one popular strategy among lead agencies is recoupment for active providers and reduction of benefits from active participants. This is generally done through one of two ways. Either through automated electronic deductions from payments, or a more manual process where you manually process deductions at each pay cycle. It really depends on how your agency operates and what works for you. All right, restitution. We finally get to restitution, which is a court-ordered process. When a debtor is convicted of fraud at sentencing, a judge can order an order of restitution. This order requires the offender to reimburse all or some of the fraudulently obtained CCDF funds back to the lead agency. And in this case, non-payment of restitution orders can result in the offender being held in contempt of court, or the restitution can convert to a civil judgment, which might make it easier to obtain. All right, now we're going to try a breakout session. We have several people that have volunteered to be facilitators for these groups. We're going to break for about 7 minutes, and these are the questions that we're going to pose to each group, each breakout group. And then we will come back in 7 minutes and talk about a few of the responses that we received from our participants today.
All right, folks. Sorry about that. I think our breakout rooms are starting to close, so
yeah, we came
be
back,
coming
and
back.
I want to apologize to Sharon for cutting her off.
Yeah, I tried to keep it open, and then it automatically closed after a while.
Yeah. So,
but it's a great time for Sharon. If she wants, we can have her talk to the larger group if she wants.
And I think we ended on the conversation. He asked me about agency error, or whether or not we collect on that as well, and I had mentioned yes. So I think that's where we just got cut off on that last sentence.
Thank you for that, Sharon.
You're welcome.
And other than that, Janae, clearly I would say repayment agreements was the number one strategy that most agencies employ. Mm-hmm. But in the case of both Massachusetts and New Jersey, talked to both Alicia and Sharon, and their states also use tax intercept as well.
Can you say hi?
All right. How about you, Bob? I had to mute everyone because we had people talking. So, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So room one, kind of the discussion, it's so short, 7 minutes go so fast. So just interesting to find out, that different states do different things. They have some that have the dedicated unit within house to do all the recovery stuff, and others that use a revenue unit to do the recovery and collection piece of things. Clearly, at least the folks that were able to talk in the room, provider side recovery is probably a bigger side of things than the client recovery. And the challenge with the provider recovery is getting collaboration or cooperation from providers to establish that overpayment by the collection of materials. And then certainly an important piece is if you can get your recovery and collections, as talked about even in the webinar, into state statute or administrative rules, so it's very clear on what's going to happen if you have to repay something, is certainly another helpful policy. So that was kind of the discussion from my room.
Awesome. Any other report outs? Tamara, Michelle, either one of you?
Yeah. So group two, although we had a very short time by the time everybody figured out what was going on, but repayment agreements definitely came up as a strategy for recoveries. And then also some of the challenges, or one of the challenges that was shared, is that following up on the funds and paying attention to those dates. So those were some of the conversations we had in room 2.
And in room 7, didn't have a super talkative group, but we did have a little bit of discussion about some of the challenges. And one of the biggest challenges was how to recoup the funds when the debt is very high and the income is very low. And another state representative mentioned that they only have a 10% recovery rate, which is very frustrating to them. And it's difficult to get folks to pay because there are no lasting consequences. However, that is something they are working on. And I encouraged anyone in the same boat to definitely reach out to regional office to see what they and NPIAW can help with as far as maybe getting some lasting consequences into their procedures and policies. And that was all for room 7.
Well, let's say they weren't that talkative. That was a good conversation right there, Michelle. What about 80 for tour?
Sure. Well, I would say our group was just getting started when we were pulled back out. So I hope we get back together again. But a couple states and territories were able to share that they typically are using outside offices as the referral process, particularly with unresponsive providers or participants. And then one state shared, and I would love to talk about this more down the road. It sounds like it's a new idea, something that's just being implemented, but wanting to have childcare at the table earlier on in the process to really weigh in, because as they mentioned, childcare is nuanced and often these fraud cases can cross multiple programs. So having the ability for childcare to weigh in, not on the fraud per se, whether there was fraud, but rather on next steps, would really be something they see as a value add. So that was just getting off the ground. So I'm hoping to hear more about that soon. And please jump in if I didn't represent that well, Sharon.
We definitely will have some additional discussions. And folks, again, I apologize. We kind of went through this room breakout a few times and it worked perfectly. We went live and we hit a tapu. So, but the next breakout session should go flawless. How about you, Linda, in your breakout room?
Sure. So we were fortunate. We had a couple of investigators in our group. Now they said they were there to learn and listen. And so we were just getting rolling on hearing from one of the states. And she was describing that they do have an investigative team, a separate entity that kind of works on that piece of it. I do know that from the person who was the investigator that they are not involved at all in restitution, or they do go to court sometimes as part of their investigative work, but they are not involved in recovery, so they're very interested in that. And I would love to hear more from that state when we get more time also, just to hear more. But it sounds like, it sounds like it's coming out of the active cases that they're simply reducing their benefits, but that wasn't clear. We did get cut off and didn't get to finish the conversation. So I hope to hear more.
Awesome. And I think we have Penny. Did you get a chance to go in your room and speak with the folks?
I did finally get into the room, but at least by the time I got in, we got started the first question and didn't even have a chance to discuss it.
All right.
So that's how far
So to
along.
make that up to you all, what we'll do in our next breakout session, I think it's safe, and I'll turn to Bob and Mike, my colleague, to add an additional, what you guys say, 5 or 10 minutes to that breakout session to allow for those.
I think we probably have time to, Janae.
Yeah.
And I would also encourage folks that if you didn't have a chance to share with us during one of these breakouts, put it in the chat and let us know. Share it with everybody else. Really what we're trying to do is to identify good strategies and best practices that are working in your state or tribe or territory that would work in other agencies as well. So if you have anything to share, please put it in the chat.
So, all right, folks. So we'll keep it moving and go to the next portion of the webinar.
That's it for my part, Janae. So I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Sorry, Mike. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. So implementing a collection process, right? So as a next level step, when a debtor fails to make payments as agreed upon, lead agencies can implement collection strategies to assist in those recovery efforts. So that's what this portion of the webinar is going to be about. It's going to be about those collection strategies and considerations for lead agencies. So on your screen, there are a few things to consider as you all implement or review your collection processes and policies. And one is, has your agency clearly outlined each step for your collection policy or process? And is this process formalized as a written document that is easily accessible? And if your agency has, does the process or policies include any of the examples on your screen, such as a list of the collection contacts, the third-party collection agency or revenue services, or does it define when a debt is past due? Remember, lead agencies have flexibility in this area since CCDF regulations do not dictate how the collection process must work. However, there are 2 pieces of critical information we want to reiterate during this webinar that the agency should consider documenting. Sometimes it's the small details that are overlooked, And when this happens, agencies may find inconsistencies in their collection process. So one is, has your agency documented when a payment is past due in the collection process? Meaning, what is the criteria for an account to move to the collection process? Is it 5 days, 10 days, 30 days? Generally speaking, a payment is past due when it's not paid by its cutoff time on the due date. Now, however, another thing to consider is, does your agency provide a grace period to make payments? These are things that should be considered when writing and reviewing your collection policies and processes. Next, does your collection policy and/or process clearly outline all the steps staff should take once an account meets the criteria of past due? Again, it's the small details that are sometimes overlooked, details that directly impact the results of your collection activities. Now, before we move into our next checkpoint, our knowledge checkpoint, let's take a quick look at some collection strategies your agency could implement. Obviously, you could contact the debtor either by mail, phone, email, or all three. Develop a partnership with a collection agency, such as your state revenue services for a tax offset, or take matters, a little further with restitution arrangements, as Mike discussed earlier. There are two important C's to the activities shown on your screen, which are communicate and collaborate. Remember, there isn't a requirement on how the agency collects misspent funds. All right, so it's time for another knowledge checkpoint. A poll will appear on your screen in just a second with 3 questions. Remember, if you cannot see all 3 questions, please scroll down for the other 2 questions, or simply type your answers into the chat box. And I believe these questions are just true or false questions. All right. And the questions, if you can't see them, CCDF regulations provide steps an agency must use to collect CCDF misspent funds. True, false, or I don't know. And I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to answer these questions.
While you guys are answering the questions, just kind of reviewing the chat. If you haven't looked in there lately, Robin White asked which states were using tax intercepts, and we got a couple of different answers for you. Alicia from Massachusetts says Massachusetts, and Molly says Wisconsin. So if folks are looking for folks that use tax intercepts, those are a couple of states.
Thank you. All right. So we have about 60% participation, folks, and I will begin to close the poll in about, 15 seconds or so. All right, so I will close the poll now at 66% participation and share those results. CCDF regulations provide steps an agency must use to collect CCDF misspent funds. That answer is false. CCDF does not provide the steps. States have flexibility here. Details on when a payment is past due is critical. This is true. It's critical, and I see that 98% agree with that. And collection activities do not include contacting the debtor. This is false. That is an activity, but obviously a lead agency has flexibility in this area and could choose to design their collection activities as they see fit. So I will stop sharing the poll. And now let's look at an example of a collection process, beginning with one of our first C's, communicate. While it's not required, agencies should consider contacting the debtor, right? Life happens, and you want to see if a modification to the repayment terms can put the debtor back on track. Remember, your goal is to recover those misspent funds. So here are some avenues and timeframes for communications. So 5 to 10 days late, you can have your staff do a phone call, an email, or both. 30 days past due, a second phone call, email, or both. But at this point, you may want to consider sending a written letter to the home address to include any warnings of penalties for failure to pay. 45 days past due, a third phone call, email, or both, and send another letter written to the home to include any warnings of penalties for failure to pay. Now, after 3 or more attempts have been made to resolve the payment issue, the agency should consider their next steps. Now, in this example, we pause at 45 days of non-payment. And the reason for the hard stop is because this would be a great point for the agency to consider, stopping point for the agency to consider conducting a fiscal or financial analysis to determine the fiscal and administrative impact of continued internal collection efforts. After a full review, the agency should have a process in place on next steps. And now we've moved to 60 days past due with 2 options. Continue the internal process. Is this cost effective? It may or may not be. The agency would need to decide, or move to the second C, collaborate. Send a 60-day letter to the debtor, certified, and send the account to the collection agency. Remember, you have flexibility in this area. And when thinking about partnering with other agencies or contractors, here are a few examples of how an agency could collaborate on their collection efforts. An agency could choose to go through an interagency agreement, such as with your state revenue services, or an intra-agency, your finance department or recovery unit, or a third-party debt collector, some company named Debt Collectors, LLC. Sorry about that, that went a little far. All right, so if the agency chooses to move forward with the revenue services with the state tax offset, it is important that the agency completes its own due diligence, such as the 3 attempts we discussed earlier with that final certified letter. In most cases, the state revenue services will outline the criteria that must be met before the agency can send the account over to the tax offset. In addition, the agency should review and apply any applicable state laws regarding debt collection for funds owed to a state agency. All right, so now let's go into our breakout session where you guys can continue your discussions on your recovery methods, your challenges to collecting debt, and also any policies or processes you may have implemented to overcome those challenges. So I think this time our breakout room should go smoothly. One moment. All right, good deal. I see that people are still joining back from the breakout rooms. A few more seconds here. Awesome. All rooms are clear. All right. So, didn't see that come up there. Tamara, I see that you're on screen. You're the first person I see. So you can do the first report out. Any aha moments or takeaways or anything that should be shared? Any cream that rises to the top in your breakout room?
So I think reducing the benefit was one that came up. in our group as far as strategies. And then one of the challenges that we talked about is when you're having to recover, you know, on providers or families that don't have the extra money to repay. So, and what a challenge that is. So those are some things we talked about. We also had a really great discussion kind of separate from the questions about the lead agency flexibility and what funds they actually recover, meaning if it's an agency error, who in our group kind of recovered on agency errors and what that looks like. So we had a great actually conversation. Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah, I was surprised that one didn't come up earlier when we discussed the federal regulations on recovering funds. How about you, Bob?
I actually had a pretty good discussion. It was a longer time requires a longer memory, so I took some notes. But interesting, we did talk about the payment reduction from folks that are receiving the benefits, and the challenge there being that when they closed, then it becomes much harder to recover from them. Like from Wisconsin, so they used to use a benefit reduction, which I recall from my time there, but they haven't used that since the last 7 or 8 years because they're finding it difficult to recover from that. Kentucky, however, says they do, and they have a decent recovery agreement with the providers, and they can choose how much they want to be deducted, which then gets applied to the children that the overpayment was created from. So that was interesting. One of the challenges, or one of the that was kind of expressed, was when trying to get providers to make their repayments, that sometimes it comes down ultimately to shutting off their subsidy payments in order for them to, to kind of pay attention, which for most states, it seems like that is their last resort to do that. But unfortunately, sometimes that disrupts service, and that is what's needed to get them to collect. Talked about different ways of receiving payments. And I think that's it. But a really good discussion, I think. And some folks, I think, had some good side conversations. So.
Good deal. All right, Mr. McKenzie, how about you? Mike?
Yep, I'm just getting off mute. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries.
So similar conversations, I would say, to Tamara's group, in that, we talked quite a bit about the implications of improper payments on the family, and that the kids may not have done anything wrong, but you still can reduce the payments as a result of an improper payment. And so Monica was talking about the fact that in New Mexico, they recoup repayments from the family only if it's related to fraud. And so we were talking about that. And in Washington State, James was telling us that they actually contract with another agency to do their collections. So he really couldn't speak to the specific issues that they deal with. But we talked about the fact that the buck ultimately stops with the lead agency. And so what they have done is they've entered into a service level agreement with this contractor. And so that sets the expectations in terms of what they have to report, when they have to report, how they have to report, and that type of thing. And Washington is also, James really liked what, I hope I'm not misrepresenting this, James, but he seemed to really like what New Mexico is doing in terms of only collecting repayments from families if it's related to fraud. And Washington is pursuing a similar legislative path right now because their legislature's in session, and they're trying to get similar legislation to what Monica described for New Mexico in Washington at this time. So good discussion. And thanks to everybody that participated. I appreciate that.
It's nice. Sounds like it was a great, rich discussion. How about you, Linda Winings?
I think most of our conversation was just discussing the idea that it's kind of similar to what Tamara mentioned, that there are, sort of pros and cons about different ways of trying to recover the money. And for example, there was a conversation about if you are trying to get repayment from a provider in one of the states, if they're not successful with that, or if they stop making the payments, or they after they send their letter, if they can't get them to pay it back, they decertify them. And the problem with that, of course, is that they're losing providers that way. And that creates other problems. So they would really like to try to find other solutions to that problem. And so we were trying to kind of work around that a little bit. And that's about as far as we got. We were fortunate to have kind of the viewpoint of some investigators in our group. And so they were starting to ask their own questions. So as always, you always wish you had a little bit more time to talk, but that's what we discussed.
Okay, good deal. Penny, any report outs from your room?
There we go. Couldn't get my mute off. Yeah, there's some great discussion there too. There was discussion, a state shared about their collection process, and all the way up to having an MOU with a state agency that will take over the collections. That sounded like that works pretty well. Some of the big challenges that I was hearing from the states was that they either don't have enough staff to investigate and do the collections, or also the staff are working a lot of hours and for little pay. And then another big challenge was not wanting to reduce benefits because of how that impacts the children in care, potentially children that are in unsafe situations and really need those benefits. So there was some good discussion too about potential policies that could help mitigate that a little bit. I think it was New Jersey shared about that having a policy where they categorically, if they're in the foster system, DFS, they do not sanction or reduce benefits for those children. And that, let's see, another having, I know what Wyoming was talking about, having just in fact, both of them were in our group, the only two investigators that cover the whole state and also are responsible for the collections. And it sounds like, having Louisiana talked about having this agency that would do that collection for them when it came to it, but they would try not to get to that point. So just really good discussion between the states about how they handled each other, how they handled challenges that each other shared.
Nice. 80, have a report out for you?
I know we just have 1 minute. I don't want to shortchange my group. So I'm looking for anything different that might have emerged. So certainly a lot of the same themes around working directly with the clients over a certain period of time, having established a statement of work, procedures, templates, communication protocols, but then also turning to a third-party entity after a certain point of maybe non-responsiveness. Same theme around organizational capacity. I think one state put it very interestingly, perhaps a difference in priorities. And she had mentioned, that their program integrity unit can sometimes be seen as a necessary evil. So of course, there's always that tension between wanting to collect this money, but also needing to get money out the door, particularly with the influx of funding and new initiatives and spending that were coming out over the last couple of years. So facing the same struggles with staff turnover, not enough staff to do all of the work that they want to do. And then the last thing I'll mention, because I don't think it came up, that one state did also share issues with providers filing bankruptcy to get rid of these charges and then going across state lines to another state to, I'm not going to use the correct terminology, but essentially get that bankruptcy discharged and then coming back to the state to start a business again or try to start a business again. So that was something interesting. I don't think the other folks on our group had heard that before, but a few were interested in going back to see if that is something they should be looking at. So I'll end there.
Yeah, that bankruptcy, I heard about that one at UCoff. So that is an interesting one. And I know we have Michelle. We can squeeze one in from you, Michelle.
Okay, really quick. The biggest theme in ours was just disconnection. There were people who saying they don't know what the collection process is because a third party or a different bureau handles it. There were some specific challenges around having providers asking how much they know and not being able to figure out because they can't see that information. So what the third party can see, sometimes the lead agency needs and can't get to, and sometimes what the lead agency has that the third party can't see might be vital information as well. And then we did have and then also, trying to solve that, one agency was like, we want to be in charge of the whole process, but we don't have enough people staffed to be able to handle that. So there were definitely themes of disconnection and just not being able to do the process, stay on top of things as well as they liked. But there was a great strategy they have at the state level. They intercept lottery winnings if there's fraud involved. So that was a cool one. And I will wrap it up really quick.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, it seems like we did have a lot of rich discussion, and we won't be able to get to our big discussion towards the end. We do have available resources, and you guys will get this slide deck once we, get all of the dots crossed and the I's dotted and the T's crossed. We'll post this online, and you guys will send you out a copy of the slide deck as well. For technical assistance, you have your program integrity SMEs listed on your screen. If you want to receive some technical assistance in this area, definitely reach out to your regional office. As Toya stated earlier, please share your ideas. One thing that we thought about when developing this webinar was an office hours. When Mike and myself attended UCoff, this was a rich discussion, and we see that there's still a need for these discussions as it relates to recovery of these improper payments. So we're happy to do an office hour where you guys can just talk. So if you're interested in something like that, definitely include that information on your evaluation form that will populate at the end of this webinar. And I see that Bob has his hand up. Bob?
Yeah, I just didn't want to leave out the question. We had one question Robin White asked in that chat. So do you just write off agency errors? And I'm assuming that's speaking to the state who said that they only collect on fraudulent funds. So if you're the state that had that response, if you want to put your state in there, or just get to Robin White specifically and just kind of answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Bob. All right. Well, we won't hold you guys any longer, and we appreciate all that you do in administering the CCDF program. We thank you guys for your time and look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Take care.